Falling off things. So at the moment in our game, we can travel from left to right, collect coins, but there's no way of dying at all. So what we're going to do, we're going to kind of set up two things. We're going to set up enemies at some stage, probably in the next video. So if we collide into them, we die, or they can jump up and hurt us potentially. And also, if I fall off something, like you would in any type of game, I want a life to be lost as well. Now, just to point out, on my canvas, I have added already a lives label. I've also added a lives text, which is 0 underneath. And in fact, I can get rid of that because I just want to show you what it looked like. But before I actually do anything more with, in terms of like building this up, so we've got like a falling off things death, I just want to add a component to all of my text. I've got them all highlighted. And I'm going to add something called a shadow because I'm very conscious of the fact that as I kind of maybe have something in my background, so in my game, then I want them to be able to stand out. I don't want them to clash with anything. So at the moment, the shadow is 2 and or 1 and -1. I'm actually going to double those up. So that one is also -2. And you can kind of make it out on the screen a little bit. But during gameplay, then there will be a little shadow on all of these so they can stand out. And I can just go and adjust those accordingly if I want on the color. And there are other bits and pieces as well. Anyway, back to the main thing. So, like I said, we're actually going to have something. So when we fall off this, because at this point in time, the at the end of this kind of ground level is where we die. So I am going to add a platform beneath everything. So I'm going to add a 2D object, which is going to be a square. I'm actually going to change the color of it. So it's something which looks like as if we were going to die. So let's make it a bright, horrible red like so. And I'm just going to move it down into position. Now, I'm not going to do it immediately beneath it because the idea would be when our player falls off something, if it hits into this, it's actually going to be sat on it. So I'm going to drop it down a little bit lower. So when a player does actually fall off and disappears and hits it, then we lose a life, if that makes sense. And I'm just going to scale it out like so a little bit. And then if I use the rectangular tool, I can drag it across here. And in fact, I don't need to do it by here, do I really? Because that's not where the player will fall off. But they will fall off somewhere off screen here. So if I just double click on it and make that a little bit longer. You see, it helps if I add like a mouse because I'm trying to use my laptop pad. There we go, that'll do. And we're actually going to give it a proper name as well. So we call it Death Barrier. So it's easy to, oh my God, so it's easy to actually identify. Right, now, a couple of things I've got to do with this. Also, I've changed the color. I do need to add a collider to it. So it's going to be Box Collider 2D. And I also need to tick where it says is trigger. So when the player becomes in contact with it, then something will happen. If you haven't got that tick, then all the code and everything you add to it won't work at all. Now, this itself will also need to have a script added to it, which is going to be called Falling Death. And I'm not allowed to have a space between it. And new script, create an ad and it should appear down here at the bottom. And if I double click on this, it should open up in Visual Studio for us. Now, while it's doing that, just going to show you the code which we're going to be using. First of all, we're going to sort it out so actually the lives counter will go down every time we come in contact with it. So this will look very similar to the code you had in the previous video when we were counting how many kind of coins we were collecting. So I'm going to get rid of those two at the top there. This is going to go underneath. We don't need that. I don't think we actually need to start. Let me just double check that. No, we actually tell a lie, we do. So we do need to start. So I'm going to take those there and paste them over there. And a little bit further down within our update, I think it's update we don't need. That's what it is. We don't need an update procedure. We just need this void on trigger. So let me bring this in as well and drop that there. And the idea is when we first start off, we're going to have 3 lives set. Regarding lives, it really should say public int lives equals 3 because it floats as if it's a decimal place. And don't forget to use the word static in between public and int so that lives can be accessed in other scripts as well. And when the game begins, then lives, which we don't currently have, which up in the top left-hand corner on our canvas, it will say the number 3 underneath it. That's what that first bit of code does. And every time the player gets in contact with the falling death barrier, which is underneath, then our lives will get taken down by one. And I'll update it then to say we've only got 2 lives left, you've only got 1 life left, and so on. So let's save that. Let's go back onto Unity. And I'm not going to press play straight away because it is asking me there, well, what is the lives text box? So that's that one there, because the other one is my label where it just says the word live. So when I press play, first thing to notice is our lives should appear as 3 up in the top left-hand corner like they do. And when I eventually get to the end of the level, and I fall off and I hit the barrier, which we can't see, our lives drop down to 2. There's a bit of an issue there, isn't there, really? Because our game is continuously playing, we're not respawning, and and the camera's still trailing as if we're still alive. So a couple of things we're going to need to fix. A couple of things we need to add, I should say. We want a player to respawn back at the beginning of the level once you've lost a life. So I'm going to add these bits in as well onto our code. So they go under these. So we're actually making a reference here to the player and the camera, of course, which is trailing the player. So that's going to get chucked back in its original position. And the only other things I think I need to add are these 2 lines here. Like I said before, I'll explain these once they've been added in. So when we hit the falling barrier, we lose a life. It updates the score, our lives on the screen. It will then chuck the player back in this position, so that's X and Y, and the camera goes back on X, Y, and Z. So make sure you go vector 2, vector 3. Now these numbers, just to point out where I get those from, let me just save this as well. If it doesn't like something there, I mean, I'll come back to that in a moment. The player, its original starting point is minus 8.75. And the reason why I got an F after is because it's a decimal. It doesn't like it if you don't put an F if it's a decimal. And our camera, if I click on my main camera, starts off at position 00 minus 10. So basically it goes back to that point. Right, so it's saying type on namespace or end of file expected. I think I'm missing a bracket on here somewhere. Let's have a look. Oh, I got too many brackets, I think that's what it looks like. So I've got a rogue one there. So follow the dotted lines just to double check. So if I save that this time and we head back onto it, fingers crossed it should be okay. We'll click on our barrier just to make sure that there's nothing I need to connect up. Oh, actually, yeah, I've got to tell it, haven't I, what the player is. I've also got to tell it what the camera is. So basically what should happen now is when we come off the end of the level, and we fall and hit the barrier. Might increase my speed at some point as well, so it's a little bit quicker than this. It's not particularly challenging at this stage. But when I do fall and hit it, I respawn and I come back. And now my lives are 2, and I imagine that if this goes off again, it should drop down to 1 as well, and that will continue over and over. Now, one of the issues I've got is when you die, I actually want you to realize that you've died rather than you think you blink and you're back at the beginning thinking, how did that happen? So I'm going to add a delay in, so it delays for maybe 2 seconds before we respawn. So back on our code again, a couple more things we need to look at to add in. So that's these bits here, and I actually deleted these earlier, didn't I? I shouldn't have done that. So let's go back and check those at the top. To be honest, it doesn't matter what order these 4 things are. Well, I don't think so anyway. You can always test that out for me. And I'm going to copy. Well, actually, this bit here, start code routine. So anything which has got anything to do with timing, like a delay, you've got to have these 2 things in, and you have something which is called an IE enumerator. So we're actually calling a routine which does some time management, and that's what these bits are here. So I'll explain what those are when we get up and running. But just for the time being, I'm actually going to drop that in there. And these then are actually going to go into this part I've got here at the bottom. So this is going to be a separate procedure underneath the voids. So I'm going to pop that in there. I'm also going to need to put a bracket because it's going to kick off again like I did earlier. And these parts, well, after these parts, we are grabbing those lines. So I'm just going to cut them out by pressing Control X. Oh my God, it annoys me when that stuff happens there. I'm going to paste that into place there. Now, I think that should work now. Now, just to explain what this bit is here, timescale 0 basically means everything goes on pause. And then it says wait for 2 seconds, and then back to 1 basically makes everything continue doing what it was doing in the first place. So in theory, what should happen is now I've got a pause for 2 seconds when I die, and then I spawn back at the beginning. So let's press play. And like I said, I should have increased the speed, but we just let it do what it's got to do in a minute. And then I pause for 2 seconds, I respawn, so then I can acknowledge, right, I realize how I died now. Now, what I'm thinking of doing with mine is adding a sound effect in that 2 seconds for it to go, bah, 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 and then it loads back into this space here. But if you want to be doing that, just go and watch the sound video, which is one of the previous tutorials to actually help you with that then. Now, in the next video, we're actually going to be looking at when we get down to live 0, then it doesn't keep counting down to -1, -2, and so on. It gets a 0 and it takes us to a game over scene, and that's going to be called scene management. Hi, Future Rob here. Something to add to the respawn process is a pan, like you just saw there. So the camera actually doesn't just appear back at the beginning of the level, it actually kind of zooms across the screen back to that original point. And the way to do that, if I just grab my script, and this script will look a little bit different from what was just on the video. The script pass Rob was just showing you more or less looks like what we've got here with the static int added in, like I kind of butted it in and said halfway through that video. To get that kind of pan effect to happen, you will need to add in this line to your variables. And then down in amongst your respawn delay, so you've got all this already set up, instead of the camera line, replace it with this line here. And then underneath that, you will need to put this in. And this basically pans the camera back to its original position. So it spawns back where it was, but it zooms across the screen. So you might need to pause this at this point so you can see the code on the screen, but give that a go. It looks a little bit nicer on your game in the end.